I'm here to talk about mental fitness. And if you were at my earlier talk, you'll have heard that we've done a lot of research into wellbeing at Converge. And as we did that research, we were trying to find out what is wellbeing actually, but also what drives wellbeing. And so this research led us to a concept that we're calling mental fitness. And it's really about thinking through the potential that you have to raise your well-being and how to unlock that potential. So I hope that you get a bit of a sense of that. If at any stage you want to hear more about this, we do have an expo booth and we've got people in there all the time who are just more than happy to answer questions as well, because I realize time is very limited in these sessions today, and so you may not actually always be able to interact in the way that you would like to be able to. So as we go through and have a look at this, I'm just trying to make sure that I can actually advance the slides where I want them to. Here we go. We had a poll yesterday and many of you answered it. In fact, about 1,200 people altogether. And the poll asked, what do you think is the most important factor contributing to an individual's well-being? Our question, our research question when we began our journey of thinking about this. Interestingly, it was split roughly, not quite 50-50, but some people were saying the daily habits and activities you do are the thing that has the biggest impact on your well-being. Other people thought, look, it's probably pretty evenly distributed across personality, childhood experiences, life circumstances, and the kinds of things you do day to day. Would you like to hear the science? Here's the science that we found when we investigated that. And the answer is actually personality is absolutely outstandingly the biggest driver. Maybe something you didn't want to hear, but I'm afraid to say it is consistently shown by the research to be the biggest factor in the well-being of any person is their personality. So something like 50 to 80%. It depends on the study, depends on the researcher and how they actually investigated this. The second most important is activities, and the third most important, and hardly, it's really quite a minor factor, is the life events that happen to you. So in other words, the 3% of you that said personality, yep, that was right. The early childhood experiences actually, to the extent that those often do get folded into the longer term sort of personality traits that someone has, that may also be considered to be kind of part of that. But I'm afraid, no, daily habits and activities are not the main driver. Life circumstance is not the main driver, and they are not all equal. So it's really interesting that even amongst 1,200 people who are among the more passionate exponents of well-being, we're not always exactly sure about what the research tells us. And this is what we've seen. However, that all sounds a little bit pessimistic, because if personality is the main driver, personality is really hard to change, and it's just not something you can sit down and say, I'm going to become a completely different person with a completely different personality. That's not realistic. So one of the things that we then ask is, well, what can I do? Because if I can't easily change my personality, is well-being something that I need to give up on? And the answer is absolutely not. We thought that this diagram actually might be an interesting way of looking at it. And this is having a think about well-being over time. Because one of the things I think that you need to realize about personality is, yes, it does kind of define maybe a band as a way to think about it within which your well-being might sit. But it's not necessarily the case that you're always going to be at the top or the bottom of that band. You can decide where you're going to be within that band that your personality gives you. And that's your choice about the things that you do, those daily habits and activities. And that's the bit that we at Converge are calling mental fitness. And it's a term that's gaining traction more broadly as well. What we tend to see with life circumstances, some of them do persist and some of them do turn out to have a long-term effect, but many of them are actually temporary. And so even something quite bad that happens to us, there's a theory called set point theory that researchers came up with because they were astonished at how really bad or really good things could happen to people, and it didn't really seem to make much difference to their well-being in the long run because things reverted to where they had been before. So this is a kind of picture of the way that we can influence. Now, you might again say, well, hang on, do I have to put up with my personality as it is? But actually, it's a concept that we're pretty used to with our bodies. I do not have a body of an Olympic athlete, and I've made peace with that. But nevertheless, I can actually make choices that enhance my physical fitness and that give me the best chance of kind of using my body appropriately and well and being healthy. It's kind of the same thing. You may have a personality that makes you, able to attain, heights of well-being that someone else's personality doesn't quite measure up to. And we kind of have to make peace with that a little bit. But even so, we have a lot of ability to make the best of what we have been given, of what we've got, or not. And that's a choice. It's control that we have. So the next thing that we asked once we had seen this kind of research was, okay, so what are these daily habits and activities that have an effect and that can enable well-being to be higher? And when we looked at the research, we found lots and lots of different factors. In fact, there's articles about, this thing has an effect on well-being, this other thing has an effect on well-being. It can be bewildering and confusing. So we tried to take all of that research and try to make sense of it. And this is the model that we've come up with that we believe fits almost all of the research that we've seen, as well as starting to organize and make sense of it. And so essentially, we see these activities falling into 4 main areas: body, mind, spirit, and community. And within body, what are we seeing? Exercise, sleep, nutrition, and drugs and alcohol. You'll see lots and lots of sessions in the program over the last, yesterday and today that speak to these. We've had sleep psychologists. We've got the Food and Mood Centre at Deakin University, represented by Professor Felice Jackman, I think, Jacka, sorry. So that's for nutrition. We've got a number of those things that have been really, really well covered in our sessions. We've also got a whole stream on purpose and meaning. These are things that are well known as being factors that affect well-being. What I think that we've been able to do is to organize them and start to say, can we actually measure these things? And so the next step that we took with mental fitness was to build a model and start to actually come up with some measurements that could say, where are your strengths? Where are your areas where you're a little bit weaker? And what's some advice and things that you can do to improve? And so, I could go through each of these 11 areas and talk about lots of the individual things. You heard Norman Swan this morning talking about exercise and saying for mental health, it's important that you exercise every day. It should be moderate exercise. You don't actually need to do, full on amazing marathon running in order to get mental health benefits. Small amounts are good and moderate amounts are good, but it is really very, very clear that doing small amounts of exercise are great for your mental health. Sleep. Sleep is really important. Sleep's an interesting one, actually, because it's two-directional. Sleep affects mental well-being, and mental well-being affects sleep. If you've got higher mental well-being, you'll have better sleep, and if you have better sleep, you'll have better mental well-being. So that's both positive and negative. It means you can go into an upward spiral if things are going well, or a downward spiral if things are going badly. But it is also an area where professionals will often focus, because if you can, make a small improvement in sleep, then that can start to provoke that upward spiral happening. So it's a really important one. Nutrition is really not spoken of that much. And it's important to say this is not a diet per se, as in it's not about losing weight. It's not about a fad diet. It's about sensible use of food. And it's about following good, wholesome recommendations for your food. What's been found, and again, I'm following the Deakin University advice on this, is that a Mediterranean diet, lots of great whole grains, fruit and vegetables in your diet, does measurably improve mental well-being. Drugs and alcohol. This is one that Australians don't like to hear, but no levels of drugs or alcohol, of course, apart from prescription medications that are a doctor recommended, but any amount of alcohol is not good for you. I think we all took comfort from the studies that said that a glass or two of red wine a night was actually positive for us. Unfortunately, those studies have been discredited. Their data was just being analysed in a slightly wrong way. However, it's now shown that really you're better off with none. But that doesn't mean to say that the odd glass of wine is going to tip you over the edge and you give up on well-being. No. But actually, the less you can have, the better of drugs and alcohol. Mindset is the other really, really big one. And as we've been analysing the data, as we've been starting to measure these things, we found that a positive mindset is the single biggest factor in being able to shift well-being. One of the tips that I would give here is that cultivating a positive, how do you become positive? What if you're just a glass half empty kind of person? The best advice is to keep a gratitude journal, or at least every night think about what you're thankful for. The interesting thing about this is that some research showed that doing that, even if you didn't believe in it, even if you thought that it was all a crock, simply actually doing it still improved your positive mindset. And so you were actually able to end up with better well-being through a more positive mindset, even if you were the kind of person who started off as a bit of a pessimist. Growth mindset, there's so many things I could talk about here that it's very difficult to choose, but being able to learn, not taking failure as a sign that I as a person have to give up on that activity, but rather seeing failure as simply a sign that I need to try it more. It's a skill that I need to acquire and that I can learn it. So that's the growth mindset. Mindfulness is another interesting one. In fact, sometimes I think people almost see mindfulness as the answer to mental well-being. And of course, it's part of it, but what I hope that we've shown with this model is that it's one of 11 factors. Important. It's a good one because you can take very positive action about it. You can put some mindfulness exercises into your life. It's something that you can make a habit and you can actually take action on. But it is not the sole answer. It's one part of it. Because then, excuse me, we come to the elements of spirit. Connection to nature, that had its own fireside chat yesterday, and our Director of People Assist at Converge, Kate Page, was talking about how nature can be used as a way of enhancing mental well-being. Connection to nature turns out to be a really important part, and I think you also heard Jamie this morning talking about connection to nature and connection to the earth as being an important part of our well-being. Purpose and meaning. We've, in our mental fitness model, talked about the meaning and purpose we get from our work. And that is something that researchers have studied particularly. But of course, for some people who aren't working or who aren't in paid employment, perhaps they're retired, purpose and meaning is still important. I would still say that it's purpose and meaning in work. It's just that I think you can define work quite broadly. So we find purpose and meaning in the things that we do each day, which are the activities that we are doing for, a broader kind of reason. So maybe you're retired and your work is volunteering. That's great. You don't have to be paid, but still finding purpose and meaning in that is important. The Japanese have a word for this called ikigai. And even 100-year-old Japanese people are finding ikigai, some purpose and meaning in life. And it might be in their great-grandchildren. It might be in the contribution that they're making to their community. But that ikigai is important, whether it's in work or not. And I can see I'm getting the wrap up, Tanya, which is great. But look, I wanted to emphasize that we could talk for a long time about this. Do stop by our expo booth and we'd be really happy to talk to you about this, because we have taken all of this research and turned it into a measurement that we can actually have for mental fitness and help your organisation to have a look at the mental fitness of your people.